builds a home, instead of Habitat paying the mortgage for 32 years, sell it to a nonprofit who then pays the mortgage and frees up the cash for Habitat to basically go do it over again. So, interesting.
Good evening and welcome to the City Council Conference meeting of Tuesday, obviously, September 24th, 2024. We have two items on the agenda. The first of these is the discussion regarding the contract with Food and Shelter for the emergency shelter. Mr. Purinton.
Alrighty. So, this is really kind of a status update regarding the renegotiation of our current contract with Food and Shelter for operation of the emergency shelter on 109 West Gray. As a brief history, late 2023, early 2024, the city conducted an audit of the contract with Food and Shelter. Then on May 21st, Shakira, city auditor, she presented a draft audit report and findings to council for feedback on the recommendations proposed. Based on the feedback from council, staff from about June 1st to September 19th, last week, we had been working on revisions on a new contract with Food and Shelter to address all the concerns identified in the audit. What staff had thought we would be giving this presentation today to council, we thought it would be a little bit of a different presentation. We thought we would be presenting an updated contract, going over those terms for the subsequent approval of it on October 8th, the next council meeting. And then we were also going to discuss, which is the item 2 on today, the vacant parcel across the street from the shelter on Gray Street. We're going to talk about potentially issuing an RFP for the sale and redevelopment of that property, so it's no longer just a gravel lot. So, and that could also have been used for, or could be used for, potentially funding the permanent shelter location. Well, as you guys know, that is no longer the case. On early September 19th, staff received a letter from Food and Shelter, and it's attached in your packet, and it's different from maybe how you got notice, stating the intent to step away from managing the shelter. That same day, Food and Shelter issued a Facebook post and interviewed with Norman Transcript in an article that was published the next day. I would like to go over each of those because they contain slightly different reasons for, and I think it helps us understand maybe a comprehensive reason on why this decision was made by the Food and Shelter Board. Staff was not there at the board meeting, so this is kind of the best information we have to go on. In the letter to staff last Thursday, they state a few reasons. The revised contract micromanages our ability to make decisions with compassion and care. Our revenue is directly tied to our reputation, and being unjustly painted in a poor light presents too much risk for us to continue. This was kind of in regards to the audit and future audit activities. And then finally, they did offer to continue operating the shelter on a temporary basis as we look for a new operator. So then we have their Facebook post, and they said that the contract terms that we had provided don't align with the standards that they believe are essential for providing dignity and care to those who need. And then again, they did reiterate they plan on continuing helping them manage a friend's house until we can find another operator. However, this is kind of where we were confused as a staff. So they did again say the contract presented caused the board to feel at risk. And this was, I think, another from their board president. City comes from a different perspective on how they need to handle their contractors. And I think that that's differentiated with their philosophy as an agency. And then the last one is the one that kind of prompted us to ask for clarification. April Dosher, executive director, said she hopes that one of two things will happen. One, that Food and Shelter will continue operating the shelter until a different operator is found, or that the city will come back to the table for a more robust conversation and the partnership is reconciled. Because previous to this, the notice we got that they would only operate on a temporary basis. This seems a little bit more like they are willing to operate continuing if we come back to the table. We never left the table, but that being said, it seems like there may be a path forward. I will say, we have not been able to get clarification yet from them, so still looking into that. Then, again, I sent a follow-up email asking for clarification. They gave some more, information. They really felt that we did not provide enough support to remediate some of the backlash they received from the audit. They also mentioned this, which was concerning. They suggested that we had provided a draft, and then in a later draft, we took out some language without telling them. And the language that they mentioned they thought was taken out was language that we originally put in, was that saying any future audit report would come from a third-party auditor. I looked back at all the drafts. I provided every emails when I provided those drafts. That language remained in the contract, and it was in the most recent one that we sent over. So they responded and said, it seemed like they may have understood that that was still in there, but it still wasn't, I think, maybe what they were expecting. I'm really not sure, but it was still in there, and we never took anything out that we originally put in. So other than that, we have not gotten any specifics on the contract language that they find objectionable. So they also pointed to questions that the auditor asked during the oversight meeting on September 12th and the potential impact that that could have on public opinion. And then again, I wanted to reiterate, and ask for clarification so you guys would have it tonight. Are you only willing to operate on a temporary basis, or are you willing to negotiate a more continued relationship? And they did say they did not wish to discuss the situation via email, so maybe a future in-person meeting will, maybe we can get a better answer on that, so.
Would that mean that we would still run under the current contract and it's just extended as it has been not indefinitely, isn't it? 90 days at a time?
It's month to month unless council terminates. So and that's kind of where we're at right now based on, I think, the current situation is, unless we terminate, we will continue under the new contract. So
Councilmember Dixon.
On the previous slide, the language about the third-party auditor, are they wanting the contract to say that the city auditor cannot audit this contract?
correct.
Okay.
So and that was something that we thought that as long as it is able to be audited, it doesn't really matter to us who audits it, as long as the information and everything is up,
Will they pay for the third-party auditor?
That was not, we did not necessarily negotiate for that, no.
Okay, because I think if they require that, I don't agree with that at all, but if they require it, then they're gonna have to pay for it.
I was gonna say around lack of support to remediate backlash from the audit. I do know that they were interested in developing a communication strategy if we were moving forward together as a partnership. So I could see that in a later meeting being discussed so that some of that blowback is there's actual facts and the way they're presented, laid out there for the public.
And to Councilmember Grant's point, the purpose of the revised agreement upon execution, it mitigates the audit findings, and that would be how Ms. Kalnick has described closing out that audit file. So that actually brings closure to the whole situation, which could be widely shared.
And so I think what we find from kind of the multiple sources here is that there seem to be two issues that caused the negotiations to break down, right? You have what they've said is the contract language that doesn't align with their values. And then we also have, I think most of this is related to the audit and how that's impacted the city and Food and Shelter's relationship. So I'm going to address each of those in turn, starting, I think, with the contract language.
We've got one more.
Oh, sorry.
And are you gonna get to the letter from Renaissance Legal
Yes.
and discuss it? Okay, I'll wait then.
All right, so the first issue is, I think, contract language. So just to give you guys an update, we have been busy since, you guys got the draft audit report until now. We started in June 2024, where we worked closely with Food and Shelter, specifically the executive director, and when they did have legal representation during that process with their attorneys. Multiple drafts were developed by the city based on verbal feedback from the executive director to incorporate changes they verbally requested. So the multiple drafts that we do have is city staff incorporating verbal feedback from drafts we've presented them, and then providing it again to update them on, this is the language that you requested. According to the executive director, on last week, on the 12th, she said that the contract looked like a good to go situation, and that the board feels positive after our meeting last week, and I feel strongly that they will approve it. We have been going back and forth, incorporating their language. We've been getting positive feedback based on the contract. So we were a little blindsided when we got the notice saying that the contract did not align with their values, because we have been working with them in order to develop language that was, met their approval. And on that point, the executive director, we got communications from her and emails on 3 different occasions that said that their board reviewed the contract drafts on September 9th, August 21st, and July 22nd. However, in the clarification email asking what went wrong, we received an email back stating that their whole board had not reviewed the contract until the 16th, when they decided to reject it and issue their notice. So, I don't know if they had not seen the drafts up to that point. Again, the draft that we sent most recently was not expected to be a final draft. If you notice, the draft that is included in your packet has comments that were unresolved by me asking for feedback from Food and Shelter. I specifically left those in there because I didn't want them to think it was a final version of the contract. It was still subject and open to negotiation. And then on July 17th, that was the last written feedback that we received on the actual document, that they had any red lines or changes to the proposed contract. So typically in contract negotiation, you send a draft, you edit that contract and track changes, and you send it back, right? We had gotten verbal feedback here and there. We never got, other than this time, we never got written changes, red lines, or comments. The one comment we did get was specifically addressing the security provision in Exhibit A. I replaced that comment with my comment asking for them to make changes based on that comment. I never received any sort of feedback or anything else on that contract from the time I sent that to them. So any red lines or changes that were made by city staff based on their verbal feedback. So then in our clarification email, again, I asked for specific provisions at issue at the recent board meeting. The only specific language they identified as being problematic was the third-party auditor provision, which again remained in the contract, was reviewed by them and their attorneys when they had them several times, and nothing was said negative about it from that point forward. So they had multiple options to revise, approve, look it over, and we have been told that it had been looked over by their board several times. So we were very surprised with the notice. And I also want to go over some of the contract changes, because I think it has been stated that, again, the changes to the contract don't meet their, philosophy as an organization. So I want to go over those changes and what was changed. Included in your packet is a proposed change and the original contract. I do really suggest you look at them side by side. And I think that you can even see, and again, feel free to double check me on this, but there are 2 types of contract amendments generally. There are going to be operational, which are going to be client facing, those affecting those who are staying at the shelter. Then there's going to be administrative changes. Those are agency facing, how they change their operation internally, reporting, how they conduct their financials. Those are the 2 types of contract changes that we're addressing. And that's how I'm going to address them in the presentation. And then in terms of operational changes, client-facing changes, overall compared to the current contract, The new contract provides Food and Shelter more flexibility to operate the shelter how they deem fit. I want to emphasize that, because that's a little contrary to what's been out there. And again, feel free to go line by line through the new one and the old one, and I think that you'll agree, right? There is one exception, and that's the security contractor provision that would require them to have a basic level of security similar to that they agreed to when we entered into the first agreement in 2022. That was the expectation of council at the time. It was $32,000 of the $54,000 that was submitted in their budget. And after a certain period of time, they decided without notifying the city to cancel that contract with their contractor, and then they brought, from what they said, they brought some of those employees of the contractor internally. They hired them, and they're providing security through shelter monitors. So that was the expectation, that we would have a security contractor who is specifically licensed and bonded through the state. And we put that back in the contract to make it a little more set in stone.
Yes, sir.
What kind of risk do we assume as a city, acknowledging that we set up the contract with the line item for a certain level of security and that was changed without modification of the contract?
We have some liability protections because they're an independent contractor. Okay. I wouldn't say this is coming from a liability standpoint. This is coming from like a partnership standpoint, right? When you negotiate, or, the understanding is, the shelter, the money that is being paid and the way that we expected it to be run is with a contractor, and that is the majority of your contract expenses. I think that is assumed to be how it will operate. Normally, if we didn't have such a short period of time to negotiate a contract, that would have been something, again, that would have been baked into the contract. But because it was only for a few months, we knew that they had a contractor. The contractor walked the building with us. We were not concerned that the risk that they wouldn't have a security contractor, right? Until, of course, they no longer had a security contractor. So that is something that we put in the contract. But again, it is reflective of the original intent of both parties, right? And they were not required to be armed, just CLEAT certified, which CLEAT licenses both unarmed and unarmed officers. Food and Shelter specifically modeled their security contractor procedures after City Care policies. City Care, I think, employs both armed and unarmed.
Here's Oklahoma City PD.
Yeah. And they were going to use the same exact contractor that City Care. And that was based on, we did not think that this was any concern from an operational standpoint from where they were going. And we were very lenient, and we looked at their policies and procedures that they presented. They were modeled directly after City Care. We were 100% fine. In a way, they went farther than City Care because they only wanted unarmed.
Well, I know that, sorry if I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit, but I know that City Care also, when you check into the facility, that Oklahoma City police officer, they'll take your weapons, they'll take your drugs, they'll put it in the storage locker, and then when you leave the facility the next day, they return it to you. So it's not a search in the sense of we're trying to catch people doing wrong and we're just going to use this to arrest people. So it's really just, it's a safety aspect of the facility. Did they model that procedure as well? I mean, have they been?
I believe so. I mean, the only thing that we got from council and feedback from security was we wanted at least wanding, right? We didn't necessarily want to install like the big metal detectors that you'd have to pass through. It was just the wanding that council was concerned about. So that's what we included.
I was gonna say, I was going down the rabbit hole to see what they do, because I have actually not toured their site. And I was reading that they will x-ray bags and do the metal detector. We're not even talking about x-raying bags. And I think it is interesting that in the City Care model, you can be inebriated. It doesn't turn you away for not being sober. So I believe that these security measures help keep the inebriated people as safe as they can be.
And again, I want to stress that the reason we included this, right? It's not like the city's trying to protect those outside the shelter from the people inside the shelter. This is for the protection of the people inside the shelter. And I think that if you look at the last month's incident reports, you'll see exactly why this is needed. August 31st, there was an incident report where a client of the shelter pulled a knife on shelter staff. That would have been prevented with wanting, right? And so I think that this is a basic security measure. One that is, is clearly consistent with best practices from everything that we could have found. And even according to the, food and shelter identified best practices model, which is CityCare. So,
And so you guys will know, when we started doing our warming shelter, we actually were doing it in the old library before we remodeled it. And this is one of the issues that we had when we started there, because we were wanting people when they came in. And we understand that people that may be living homeless have weapons. We understand that for their protection. And the issue was, we're not taking your weapon from you. We're doing exactly like you said. We would wand you if you had weapons in your backpack. We'd take your backpack, we'd secure it. You go into that sleeping area, go to sleep, get up the next morning, and we would return your property to you. It wasn't a set of circumstances where we were looking to cite you or arrest you for having a weapon. We understand those circumstances. And one of the things that I did when I was trying to sort of look through this myself, one of the issues that best practices will talk about is, under these circumstances, you have one or two things. If you have incidences, which you may have, you have to have enough staff to be able to take care of those incidences. And if you look at the staffing level, even in the original contract, it was a coordinator that wasn't gonna be there the entire time. It was 2 security guards and an intake people, some of which left at about 6 or 7 o'clock. So during the overnight process, you were only gonna have about 2 people there. Now, those 2 people were blackjack security people, so you were hoping that they would have the training and knowledge and experience to be able to handle some of those incidences. But when you went away from that model and you brought in people that may not have that training, that's where you create the greater risk with regard to the people that are there. And those are some of the issues that I think we were going through when we were talking about or thinking about how this should look going forward, specifically with regard to the requirement that they have some additional higher level of security.
and again,
Councilmember Dixon has a question.
I was gonna ask about the $32,000 line item for security. So when they went away from that, did the city of Norman still give food and shelter $32,000 a month for security?
we gave them, it was a flat fee based on the estimate they provided. Because we had to operate on such short notice, like less than a month is kind of the turnaround time on that. We didn't have a specific, amount that we knew was going, because they had never operated the shelter before. They were estimates based on, the way, how we had thought about it was, this is gonna be a template, and this is gonna be a trial period, and then we will have a new shelter location. We were a little optimistic at the time. We were gonna have a new shelter a shelter location. It won't be in this, not great building. And then we can kind of learn from this 4 months and then move forward under a better foundation on how to set things up going forward, including the budget. And so until we kind of had it outlined of what kind of operational expenses we're gonna have, we didn't really have a great way, like, for example, now we have a really great foundation for a reimbursement model because now we have so much history of what it actually costs to run a shelter, right? So we did a flat fee for those 4 months. That was extended another 3 months, and then that was extended in perpetuity. So we were giving them $54,000 a month. 32 of that was meant for security. Yeah.
And I think what Councilmember Grant was saying earlier about the communication part is what you're getting at, because the difficulty is, if you look at that agenda item for the original contract, it has that table in there that has those line items for the different staffing services. And then they didn't tell us that they were getting rid of the security entity, but we continued to pay them that $32,000 for security. And when Anthony and I talked to their attorneys very early on, what we said was, you guys see how this looks. I mean, if we're talking about taxpayer funds and we're paying you $32K a month, and it's supposed to be because you told us you're getting a security company, and then without our knowledge, you get rid of the security company, there are gonna be people asking questions. And if you communicated with us on the front end and said, we think we need to get rid of the security company, these are all the reasons why, this is what we're gonna do with the money, we can help you manage that because we know why, so we can tell the taxpayers, this is what happened and this is why. But under these circumstances, we're just blindsided, we have no idea why. And again, their attorneys agreed, yeah, I can understand, not saying anything nefarious happened, but we understand the optics of it. And that's part of the issue. And that's where the communication would have helped tremendously if we would have been told about that on the front end. And that's what the amended contract does, is requires them to notify the city manager if you're gonna make those types of changes. So again, we can be on the front end of it to help sort of resolve those issues or help explain to the taxpayers, this is why this happened and this is where your money is going.
And I think that this is the reason why, it is so important to, realize that this 4-month contract, that is why we are in the position we are, because what was meant to be only 4 months, the trial period, that was kind of like a stepping stone into something more permanent. We have now extended that, and we have outgrown that contract, right? So, again, the risk of that happening in a 4-month period is low, right? But when you extend it 2 years, the risk gets a little higher, so.
So Anthony, sorry, so $32,000 a month for security. How long do they go without security then?
I'm not exactly sure when.
I mean, over 6 months?
I can answer that.
Yes,
ma'am.
The notice was sent to the security company on August 31st.
Okay.
It was supposed to be effective September 15th of 2023. I believe I began the audit in the second week of December. Upon my field visit, a cleaning contractor told me they had been without security for the last 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And so,
So where'd that money go now?
So-
For optics, so we are
Yeah.
transparent in our.
It was reallocated to paying staff, hiring staff, and giving them raises.
Staff that sit on the board of food and shelter, some of them.
No,
None
sorry,
of it all
a friend's
from the
house staff.
yeah.
Okay.
So what they did is, it costs less money because you have less overhead, but they increased the level of staffing because you went from having,
Well, they went from having
Officers.
trained staff to untrained staff
Yeah.
providing security.
so,
And
Well, so essentially, they hired 2 of the security officers from the contractor, and they kind of implemented them into their own staff for a friend's house. The issue that posed, the potential issue that they posed is whether their CLEAT license was active or inactive because they changed organizations.
But the police came over and refreshed those
Okay.
training things.
Well-
Isn't that correct?
that
That's
was
the
fire
fire watch.
department.
That was the fire watch, sorry.
Different, yeah. So hence the audit, the findings, and the renegotiated contract. So there were some Facebook posts that were going around, and I hate to devote time to social media posts, but I think it's important, and on the one hand, because I think we believe that those posts were created by shelter staff. And I also think that, I also saw specifically, at least at one point, someone who had either is currently or was a shelter resident or client believed the same thing. And that does not reflect what was in the contract draft that we sent to Food and Shelter. So I kind of want to go line by line just a little bit because this is also the information I'm assuming that you saw Thursday morning. And so I would like to correct that now.
We've got
So,
about 15 minutes.
so Food and Shelter, I think they, again, in the current contract, we had a cost for security. In the proposed amendments, right, or the new contract, we specifically required security, not armed security, and wanding was required upon entry. They're saying that there should be no food at all at the shelter. We actually expanded them to have food, certain food at the shelter. The reason we were hesitant to put it in there in the first place, because the building has no sprinklers. We don't want food cooked on premises. In transportation, the original contract was silent. Under the new contract, we did not allow for transportation to be a reimbursable expense. They're currently paying caravans to take people to and from the shelter. The city currently has a reimbursement program that caravans does take advantage of that specifically allows for reimbursement on a mileage basis to and from a friend's house. So we felt that we were already providing that, so we didn't necessarily want to bake that in a second time to the contract. And then again, not having any weather considerations, again, we expanded this. They are open 5 to 7 under the old contract, and they'd have to get permission if they wanted to extend those hours. The new contract expanded their ability without permission to open expanded hours during weather events such as low temperatures, high temperatures, snow, rain, or an active hail or tornado warning. They can still request permission if those conditions aren't met, and I don't think we've ever denied them a request to this point. So again, operational changes are more lenient under the new contract. What are not more lenient are the administrative changes. So, for example, the contract shifts to a reimbursement model, which is industry standard. The expenses must follow a submitted budget with room to adjust 10% between budget categories, again, industry standard. Expenses for a shelter operation would be reimbursed with 25 days, which is better than industry standards. If you take into Oklahoma City, I think takes longer, from what we hear. Expenses requested for reimbursement require documentation, receipts, invoices, etc., industry standard. Overtime expenses would be allocated differently. We were a little bit more lenient on this. How it was currently set up is that, and what the audit found is that a lot of overtime expenses were being paid. And that is, I think, because, staffing is a huge issue, and we understand that. But I think there were issues where, food and shelter staff who worked at food and shelter were also working for a friend's house. So if you work 30 hours, for example, at food and shelter, 10 hours at a friend's house, and then an additional 10 hours overtime at a friend's house, we would be paying all of overtime expenses, even though that person only worked 20 hours at food and shelter, or at a friend's house. We just wanted to pay for half. So it's not that we said no, it's just we didn't want to pay for the full amount.
Councilman?
That's confirmed on your audit findings that,
Yes, and by
So, it would be-
admission of April Dozier. In our correspondence, that's what she explained to me.
And I also,
There, question real quick. When we hired Ms. Connick, how many applications did we get?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that. I didn't see the entire stack.
Right.
That went right to HR, but I can get you that number.
Do you think we hired the best person for the job?
And this was a coast to coast, we cast
Absolutely.
a very wide net.
I bet it's in the hundreds, maybe 100, at least. Do you think we hired the best person for the job?
I would say council doesn't make many mistakes when it comes to hiring
I
professional
agree.
staff.
And so when it comes to the audit, I think you did a tremendous job. And we're running out of time, that's why I want to bring this up real quick. But the letter that they posted back, calling all your findings, wanting a letter of retraction and all that, would you like to respond to that?
Only with facts.
That's perfect.
I'm not sure how much time we have. I don't wanna cut off Anthony's presentation either.
Right?
Thank you for your faith and your trust.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so we can start with one. So the first one, second paragraph, page 31 in your packet. No specifications as to how the money for services was to be spent was identified anywhere in the contract. However, the executive director provided estimated costs for expenditures to the city manager, ensuring all money received was spent in benefit of the emergency shelter. So, number one here, it's the budget that she presented that the contract was stipulated on. Number two, in December 2023, a person purported to act on behalf of the city of Norman appeared at AFH unannounced while a custodial team was present and cleaning the building. The unannounced visitor, myself, Shakira County City Auditor, asked a custodian on duty several questions. The custodian could not answer, then promptly departed. I'd like to point you to section 4 of the contract where it says a right to audit and a right to monitor the premises. Here is the memo that I wrote about that field visit, which states, I won't state the gentleman's name, but the door was locked and an individual was observed performing cleaning services. I knocked to introduce myself as the city auditor for the city of Norman and asked if I could ask the individual questions. He stated he would answer to the best of his ability. He was interviewed and the following information was ascertained. There had been 3 or 4 new hires to perform cleaning and intake duties. Security detail had not been employed for the last 2 or 3 months. I asked who performed security duties while fire watch is conducted. The individual stated that staff secures the inside of the building while fireworks duties are conducted by a single member of staff on duty. Staff has all keys needed to gain access into the building and fire watch does not have keys. Additionally, I observed an unlocked cabinet that appeared to be a medicine cabinet with signs that denoted first aid and Narcan posted on the cabinet. I departed and returned to the office at the City of Norman Municipal Complex. I returned later in the evening at about 4:30 to observe operations. At that time, I observed people lined up outside waiting for intake. The doors were locked, but staff were observed inside. I knocked to introduce myself to staff, won't say their names. I asked what their positions were and inquired about fire watch. I was informed that there were 4 employees on staff that performed fire watch duties, one of which were present. When I asked about the presence of employees who provide security service at the shelter, the staff stopped answering questions at the direction of April Dozier, and I was politely escorted out. The field visit was concluded. I'm sorry, didn't mean to continue.
Well, I know there's a lot to go over. And so I would ask that we have another study session because we need to devote a lot more time to this.
I agree.
Rick, as far as the contract goes, real quick, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
but
you're okay.
Hopefully we
You're
can
okay.
actually all come back and listen to all this because this is very important. When it comes to contracts, good faith is very important, correct?
Well, yeah.
Obviously. But would you say that the management and employees of Food and Shelter have worked in good faith in creating this new contract?
At this point, President, I can't answer that, and the reason is because I have not been that involved.
From an outsider's perspective,
met-
looking in as
Well, I met
a
with,
city attorney looking at,
well, I met with the attorneys, with Anthony very early on. And what we talked about was, and you guys have seen the settlement demand, what we talked about was, I usually approach things from looking a little bit ahead and trying to understand what the expectations are. And the conversation with them was, we can agendize this and put it on council, and probably what you're gonna get is, you're gonna get some people that are for you, you're gonna get some people that are against you, and it could turn really ugly. Is that what you want? Because that's what you are risking. Our position was, the better way for us to handle this is to try to resolve some of these issues that the auditor has identified in an amended contract, and just everybody go forward. And like we were saying earlier, and I don't disagree with Councilmember Grant talking about the communication piece. That's a really big issue, specifically when it has to do with the money. And again, I'm not saying that you guys did anything nefarious. What I'm telling you is, from the outside looking in, this doesn't look good. It just doesn't look that great. So how about the process being, we sit down at the table and hammer out a new contract that we can present to you guys that says the issues that the auditor has identified have been resolved in this contract. She will issue a final report that says, I've looked at the amended contract and the issues that I've identified have been resolved, so we're good to go forward. And what you're seeing from what Anthony's experience has been, I sit in on the first meeting, I didn't sit in on any meetings after that. But it's been a back and forth. It's been a, yes, we'll negotiate with you and we're making some progress, and then the next thing you know, it's, we want that back on the council agenda, we want her to apologize, we want you to do all this stuff. And then we'll talk, Anthony will talk to them again, kind of sort of talk them off the cliff, and then it's okay, we're back to negotiating. And the next thing you know, you get another demand letter saying, we don't want to negotiate anymore. From our perspective, it's, and you know, the biggest part of this is the concept of the city coming back to the negotiation table. We never left.
Right.
We never left. We've been here trying to get you guys to give us the information or to give us the amendments, the language that you think fits whatever model that you want sort of to operate under, but it has to have some accountability from our perspective, because again, we're spending taxpayer dollars on this shelter, and it's almost like, so kind of the things that's going through my head are things like, if I worked at McDonald's and Burger King, if I worked 10 hours at McDonald's and 10 hours at Burger King, I don't get overtime from either one of them. So if I'm working for Food and Shelter and then I go work for a friend's house, unless I'm working 40 hours at both those entities, I don't get overtime from either one of them.
there's a lot of that happens,
So-
individuals working in both.
So there's the thought process of, we need to talk through some of this to figure out which way we're going so that we're all on the same page. And I'm a little bit taken aback by the suggestion that somehow staff has been nefarious. Like, what I'm reading from here is, maybe this has something to do with the downtowners. I don't know any of the downtowners. They have not had any input with regard to this contract that I'm aware of.
So we did get a list of recommendations on the shelter contract from the Downtowners Association. We did share those with April. We said, we think you're already doing a lot of these. If you are already doing them, and if they are a part of your normal practice, could you please put them in your policies and procedures, right? So that we can point to it if, you know, someone says, hey, they need to be doing this, we can point to it and say, they are doing this, right? Because they were already doing it, which was in a lot of those items. And then, we said, you know, and if this is something that we can, you know, we're gonna have to be good neighbors, right? I'm not saying that we're pushing for anything in this contract, but we think that everyone would be benefited if you look through these and there are some that you agree with, that you can put in your policies and procedures. Then we got an email back and she did go ahead and put some of those in her policies and procedures. But again, it was very much a collaborative process and there was no pushback from them on those items. And that was very, very early on, like in July, that happened.
I think they're open to still talking, so because we only have like 5 minutes left.
Yeah,
I
so-
would like to be able to have a robust conversation with their board, because I am aware that I almost feel there's a case of too many cooks in the kitchen. And I think they've gotten some advice that is from people not on their board recently that have also gummed up the works. But I remain optimistic that if we did have a conversation with them and if their board is watching tonight and sees things the way that have been presented, that they would want to come back to that table and hammer the rest of this out.
And so, and to kind of just bring you up to speed on what we've been doing since Thursday, you know, our initial reading of the notice was that, and again, they have not clarified up to this point, at least in email. And it seemed like they were only willing to operate until we can find a new operator. We have reached out to a few operators. We've gotten one no, but we're still working through that. I would, you know, if I had to put it, it's most likely we probably aren't gonna find an operator on short notice and who is able and willing to do it. But it's not a foregone conclusion, but we're working diligently on that.
Let me take a moment right here and see what the consensus is. If in 2 weeks, could we come back to this, Mr. Manager, and put it back on roll it back on the agenda? Is that good for you?
Absolutely, nope, that
Well,
works just fine.
Well, can I,
Yes, sir.
one thing that we will need to figure out, we will need some appropriation of funding at the next, because our bill is due 2 days after the next council meeting.
Well, then should we back it up to a week and put it on next Tuesday? I don't know what we have next Tuesday.
Just a study session, we could call it a special meeting for an action item, we can do that.
And then that will give us time to meet with their board and get some clarification.
Is that agreeable? Anybody disagree? The reason why is I need to shift to the next topic because we have a choice. Now that we've used that space up next week, we still have another discussion point. Can we take a recess from this meeting, go do the council meeting, and come back in here and hear the discussion item number 2?
And I will be brief, I promise you.
And he will be brief. It should be, I'm not a prophet, a reasonably short meeting for us. Is that agreeable, or does that hold everybody up? Okay. Well, then what I suggest we do is we take a recess from here. Did you have anything more, Anthony? I didn't mean to cut you off.
I think that this will give us, no, I think that's great. We'll be able to get a little bit more information for you guys because it's very, you know, again, we've updated you, let us get you some more information so you can make a better decision.
And it's well appreciated that you're doing this. This is a sensitive issue and we want to solve it correctly. And it just getting the time to be able to think through these things without accusations is wonderful. But what I suggest we do is go into recess on this meeting. We'll start at 6:30 in council chambers, do the council meeting, and then